Voting has a role in public health. A lot of people do not believe that voting affects your well-being. The individuals and elected officials that we vote for make decisions on housing, education, employment concerns, climate, infrastructure, and we see what's happening with gun violence and mass shootings across this country. We have to make sure that we elect people who will represent our needs. Right now, just recently, we are trying to get an infrastructure bill, and I will be talking about in this video the impact of 617,000 bridges in the United States. But what we're seeing, 42% of those bridges are structurally deficient. We have 178 million people driving these roads every day. So let's discuss it. Welcome to Nurse Informed. Hello, my name is Michelle George and welcome to Nurse Informed. And this segment of Nurse Informed, we're going to talk about voting, a role in public health. Safe and accessible voting, the role of public health. We have to remember voting strengthens our democracy. We've seen over the last year of the voting restriction laws that have come into play to several states. But we want to make sure, not just as nurses, but as citizens, that we want to make sure we maintain that we are involved in clear civic engagement through voting, which is one of the great influencers of public policies. What is public health? Public health talks about the science of practicing and improving the health of a community, whether it's preventive medicine, health education, controlling of communicable disease, or even monitoring the environmental hazards that we see. We've also seen in the last year, as we struggled in the last 18 months dealing with COVID-19 during this pandemic, and how it has affected the United States with experiencing at least over 600,000 deaths and over 33 million cases. So let's go back down the history of the Jim Crow era. Southern states passed segregation laws to separate white and black people from public and private facilities, whether it was hospitals, restrooms, even cemeteries. Even African Americans could not be buried in certain cemeteries. We have to remember that the Jim Crow laws that was experienced in the 1960s, that we're experiencing today, even in 2021. Let's go down memory lane and talk about Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers was a young African-American male. He was the Mississippi field director for the NAACP. But Medgar Evers was gunned down in front of his home, had a wife and young children at the time, because he took the time to register people to vote. We cannot forget the blood that was spilled for Medgar Evers. And we have to remember that we continue to have to fight the good fight. How could we forget about Viola Liuzzo? She was an American housewife, but she was a civil rights activist. She went down from Detroit to Montgomery, Alabama to join into from Montgomery to Selma, Alabama to join into the Bloody Sunday March. She participated, but we also, on a dark day that she was gunned down and fatally shot, fires from pursuing the right for people to have the right to vote, but shot by the Ku Klux Klan. And how could we forget the late Congressman John Lewis? He stated that the vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It's the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democratic society, and we got to use it, because we're going to see as I move on how the voting restriction laws, the voter disenfranchisement laws, voter suppression laws, how that's playing into communities of color. But we have to remember to pass the John Lewis Civil Rights Act. So let's look now to 2021. We've been dealing with the issues of an infrastructure bill. America's Infrastructure Report Card, it talked about every 4 years, the American Society of Civil Engineers give a report card which depicts the conditions and performance of our bridges across the country. And as we see that our bridges are in poor condition, a lot of times I'm driving under the bridge where you see a train going over the bridge. And we know trains weigh tons and tons of pounds. But when I look to my left or look to my right, I see cracks in the bridges. The infrastructure report card, very dismal. There are more than 617,000 bridges across the United States, and currently 42% of those bridges are structurally deficient, meaning that they are in very poor condition. This is a public health crisis. Unfortunately, if we do not take care of this infrastructure, we have to encourage and call our legislators to get this done. So we have an obligation to not just call the legislature in your state, but also call the Senate, the Republican Senate, the Republican House in Washington, D.C., to tell them to pass the infrastructure bill, because recently the bill was stalled again. President Biden has been working so hard to get an infrastructure bill, as well as our Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Schumer. We have to make sure this infrastructure bill get passed. It affects all of us, as well as those legislators, because they have to drive in cars across bridges themselves. So we want everyone safe. So that is why voting is so important. It does have a role in public health. In 2013, the citizens of Shelby County, Alabama, sued Attorney General Eric Holder, and he was the Attorney General under the President Obama administration, citing, as I said before, the sections of the 1965 voting rights were no longer necessary because discrimination in voting was no longer a problem. And it was a 5-4 decision by the United States Supreme Court. But as I stated before, as soon as that decision was made, voting rights suppression law started in 2013. And now that since there is no pre-clearance where states have to go through the federal government to see what's going on, that's why we have our issues. So what we have to remember, that God will always be by our side when we fight the good fight. These voting restriction laws are basically evil. So the only solution is to make sure that you vote. It's so important.
I get to wondering when the care of this world seems more than I can bear. And it looks like I have to suffer all alone. Then I have to stop and check myself, 'cause I already know better than anyone else that He's always by my side. Church, I try to be strong when the world is looking. I give a smile like all is well, but down on the inside, my heart is filled with so much pain. I have to tell the Lord, I tell Him, God, take it. You're bigger than me. You're bigger than me. He leaves me standing, so that the whole world can see that He's always been there all the time. He's been by my side. Sometimes I ask the question, I say, where is God when I'm broken? Does He even care when I'm sad? When I'm walking walking through life's sinking sand. That's the time I realized that he's carrying me. When I stumble, he's lifting me up. He's holding my hand. He's always by my side. He told me that.
Right here, I talked about the Senate bill, the State Senate Bill 2002 passes the Georgia House, reduce early voting for runoffs, prohibit volunteers from giving voters food and water, and absentee voters must provide driver's license numbers and other supporting documentation. So you may need a driver's license and also a passport. But make sure, do not let that stop you. Make sure, as I stated before, that you are not one of the citizens that's purged from Georgia's voting rolls. I talked about before, more than 100,000 names will be removed from Georgia's voting registration rolls in an attempt to keep the state's voting files up to date, the Georgia Secretary of State announced recently. Right. Fair Fight Action Organization that's headed by Stacey Abrams. We are launching this to fight back and let our leaders know that we demand the freedom to vote so we have the freedom to live. We just have to continue. There will be barriers, but if your polling place move, start now because a lot of elections are coming up in the August primary and also in November. Many of these new laws disproportionately impact the elderly, people of color, and Black Americans. But we want to make sure, and we thank God for Stacey Abrams continue the fight because we also is encouraged just by her courage. Let's talk about Michigan. Voting, a role in public health. Michigan's election leaders criticized a package of Republican-backed voting bills. The Secretary of State is Jocelyn Benson, but she didn't hold back. She stated that we are witnessing state legislators acting as if their anti-American effort to take away citizens' freedom to vote is somehow the right thing to do. And also, to be honest with you, they're disenfranchising their own base. So what do we do in a situation like this? If you live in the state of Michigan, vote. Start early. In the state of Michigan, there were several bills. Senate Bill 285, where you have to attach a copy of your ID to your application and requiring the clerks to issue a provisional absentee ballot, which does not make any sense. Prohibiting voters from using a drop box after 5 p.m. Also prohibiting clerks from providing prepaid postage for absentee ballots. So what you can do now to fight that, start buying your postage stamps right now to build up. And you can mail your own absentee ballot or you can go into your local Secretary of State office. But the key thing is the reminder to vote. As we see this picture back in the 1960s, we saw African Americans had water hose sprayed on them. We saw the history books where African Americans were bit by German shepherds by dogs. We will stand on their shoulders and we will continue to make sure we vote and have that voice. Because a lot of the issues that are affecting voting, affordable housing, education, climate control, and especially the infrastructure bill, is a public health crisis. Let's give an example. In the city of Detroit, Detroit has a Detroit city charter that elected officials, charter commissioners were voted in 2018, voted for charter commissioners. It took almost 2 years to get that together, to get the charter that is the governing document of the city of Detroit. There were Detroit citizens that stayed on the cause for 4 hours. The Charter Commission met twice a month. They put in place water affordability, demolition companies putting toxic chemicals in soil that was shown to have happened, but just to make sure those people were accountable. But the High Court directed the Court of Appeals to expedite the consideration of an appeal filed by the Detroit Charter Revision Commission. So there was a decision to not put the charter on the ballot, but the case went to the Michigan Supreme Court. The revised charter's Declaration of Rights reads, "The people have a right to expect their city government to provide its residents affordable housing, libraries, historical museums, clean air, soil, safe water, affordable drinking water. But these commissioners fought. The citizens of Detroit fought. And this year, the citizens of Detroit will be able to vote on that city charter. So I encourage the citizens of Detroit to fight the good fight, because throughout the bankruptcy that the citizens of Detroit have gone through, you have to make sure that you do not give up your right to vote. Research has shown there was a 20% increase in African Americans voting last year. So make sure we're fighting for immigrant rights as well as internet accessibility for our young people. Right here, this slide is just showing the citizens of Detroit, the elected officials, as well as the citizens, and making sure that we vote in this year's election. I had this slide here of my parents. My parents were born out of that movement of the civil rights era. And I spoke before, my mother, who showed me as a little girl that the water fountain, when she was a little girl, that she couldn't drink and the water fountain stated color and white. So I have an obligation, as I learned the history of my family, that I have to continue to fight the good fight. Also as a nurse, to advocate for the community, but also as a citizen. As we move forward and in this segment of Nurse Inform, I would like to thank Blessed by Four. Thank you for your musical ability. He's always by my side to help encourage those who are watching this video, those who have been struggling during the pandemic, to let them know to fight the good fight. I also going to end this segment of Nurse Inform with the Unity Baptist Church Choir, featuring a beautiful anointed soloist, Margaret Jenkins, under the direction of Dr. Dorgan Needham, and words written by the late Ernest Needham, that you've been truly wondrously blessed. And so as we go through our history and we study those who have died before us, those who are still living, that we are not in this fight alone. So remember, do not let anyone stop you from voting. It is a public health crisis. Thank you for tuning in to Nurse Inform.
Consider all the good things God has done for you. Consider all the many times how He's brought you safely through. Consider all the many ways how He's given you so much happiness. Then don't you know that you've been truly, think about your health and strength.